Her daughter-in-law spit in her tea and called it mercy. Miriam Ellis didn't flinch. She set the cup down and smiled. Sean, her only son, chuckled like the punchline had landed. By the end of the week, their names vanished from the estate, the will, and the deed to the house they thought they'd inherited. She'd spent years as the gracious matriarch. Now she was the architect of their exit. And when they returned to collect, they found the locks changed, and the foundation rebuilt without them. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The china clinked faintly as Miriam set the tray down on the glass sunroom table, careful not to spill. The room, awash in late afternoon light, was her favorite part of the house. Ivy tracing the windows, the faint scent of camellias just starting to bloom outside. But even the sun couldn't warm the chill coming off the chairs where Sean and Brittany sat stiffly, their smiles too still, their eyes too sharp. "Cream?" Miriam asked, lifting the porcelain pitcher with the same grace she'd used at bridal showers, holiday brunches, and the monthly garden society meetings. "Almond milk," Brittany said, not looking up from her phone. "I can't do dairy." Miriam didn't flinch. "Of course you can't." She set the pitcher down. Brittany finally looked up, hair perfectly waved, her lips pink and matte. "I read that caffeine accelerates aging, but I guess at a certain point it doesn't matter." Sean gave a small, dry chuckle from behind his mug. He hadn't shaved that morning. His collar was creased, and there was a smudge of something, maybe toothpaste, on his cuff. Miriam poured for herself last. Her favorite teacup. White porcelain, rimmed in gold, with a faint hairline crack she'd never repaired. She held the handle lightly, her hands still steady, her posture as composed as ever. Brittany waited until Miriam lifted the cup to her lips. Then she leaned forward, subtle but deliberate, and spat into it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. One quick drop of contempt, barely visible to the eye, but Miriam saw it, clear as if it were ink. She paused. Her hand didn't shake. Her smile didn't waver. Brittany tilted her head and whispered, just loud enough to be heard over the soft hum of the ceiling fan. "You've had enough for one life." Sean didn't protest, didn't flinch. He just let out a short snort and said, "She's not wrong." Miriam set the teacup down slowly. The sound of it meeting the saucer was the only reply. Outside, the wind shifted. A few dry leaves skated across the patio. Rosie had swept it clean that morning. "Have you thought more about moving the statue from the garden?" Brittany asked suddenly, folding her hands. "It really blocks the sightline from the sunroom. I was thinking a minimalist water feature instead." Miriam folded her napkin in half. "I haven't. But I admire your vision." Sean glanced toward the patio. "And we were talking about knocking out the back wall of the kitchen to open the space. Brittany has a contractor lined up." Brittany nodded, sipping delicately from her untouched cup. "You'd still have a room in the carriage house, unless the stairs are a problem." Miriam smiled gently. "Everything's a problem when you don't ask first." The sun dipped lower. Shadows lengthened across the floor. A grandfather clock ticked from the hall, steady and indifferent. No one touched the tray again. 20 minutes later, Brittany excused herself with a too sweet, "Thanks for the chat." Sean followed her, avoiding Miriam's eyes, mumbling something about scheduling. The moment the door closed behind them, Miriam reached for a cloth napkin, picked up her cup, and walked to the kitchen. She poured the untouched tea down the sink, rinsed the cup 3 times, and dried it slowly with the towel that hung by the window. She didn't say a word, not until the sun had fully set and the shadows had taken their place in the corners of the house. That's when the phone rang. "Tell me it wasn't bad," Ava said without preamble. Miriam settled into her armchair, legs tucked beneath her. "She spit in my tea." The silence on the other end stretched just long enough to feel like thunder. "She what?" "Right into the cup, one quick drop, and then she smiled." "Jesus Christ," Ava whispered. "And Sean?" "He laughed." Ava exhaled. "What did you do?" "I didn't drink." "Is that all?" Miriam looked toward the china cabinet. Her favorite teapot, the matching one, was still there, uncracked, untouched. But not for long. "No," she said quietly. That was just the first move. The air inside Carl Bixby's office was always a little too cold, no matter the season. The old radiator hissed in the corner like it resented the weather entirely, and the walls, lined with oak shelves and stiff blue binders, smelled faintly of polished leather and casework. Miriam sat perfectly upright in the leather chair across. From Carl's desk, her hands folded around a manila folder she hadn't yet opened. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in narrow slats, striping the desk in light and shadow. Behind Carl, a framed print read, "Trust isn't inherited. It's earned." She'd given it to him herself 15 years ago. Carl closed the thick file he'd been reviewing and looked at her over his reading glasses. "You're earlier than usual." "I slept well," Miriam said. "Clarity's good for that." He gave her a small, knowing nod. "We haven't updated anything since 2018. I take it that's about to change." Miriam reached into her handbag, removed a smaller file, and slid it across the desk. "I want everything airtight, every access revoked, every illusion cleared." Carl opened the file slowly, his eyes scanning the top page. "Ah, the Ellis beneficiary clause. It was never finalized," she said. "Number at your request." Miriam leaned back slightly, letting her gaze drift to the corner of the office where a brass clock ticked quietly. "They've counted every dollar, walked through every room like it's already theirs, but I never signed the delivery." Carl tapped the end of his pen on the margin. "We can remove even the suggestion of expectation. Beneficiary status, medical proxy, financial powers, all rescindable, all legal." She nodded once. "Precise." "Do it." There was no shake in her voice, no hesitation, but Carl had known her long enough to read beneath the surface. He didn't ask what prompted the change. He didn't need to. "I'll prepare the amended documents," he said. "We'll add Ava as backup executor and Rosie as healthcare proxy. That's still your preference?" "They've shown up for years," Miriam said, "without asking what they get in return." Carl smiled faintly. "Rare trait." He turned to his keyboard, fingers tapping with practiced speed. "You'll need to come in again next week to finalize the deed transfer if you're planning what I think you're planning." "I am," she said. He looked up. "And the will?" Miriam didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on the bookshelf again, where a single photo sat among the law books, her husband Benjamin shaking hands with Carl on the courthouse steps the year they secured the historical designation for the Ellis property. "I'd like to move the house," she said finally. "Out of reach." Carl stopped typing. "Understood." Miriam reached for her gloves. "Keep it quiet for now. Let them play their games a little longer." Carl gave a single, sharp nod. "My silence is still free of charge." As she stood to leave, Carl added, "They'll find out, eventually." "I know," she said, "but I'd rather it be from the mail, not the mirror." Outside, the late morning light warmed the marble steps of the law office. Miriam adjusted her scarf, her breath clouding faintly in the air. Across the street, a couple argued over parking meters. Life kept unfolding, indifferent to the subtle wars waged over legacy and loyalty. By the time Miriam returned home, the sunroom was once again flooded with light, the exact angle she preferred for reading. But something sharp glinted on the coffee table. Her phone, screen up. A notification from Rosie. Photo tagged Brittany Ellis. Historic Ellis, home caption. "Someday, this'll be mine." The photo was recent, fresh manicure wrapped around Miriam's favorite teacup. The same one that hadn't made it back into the cabinet yet. Miriam stared at the image for a long time. Not because it shocked her, it didn't, but because of the audacity, the arrogance of a caption masquerading as a prophecy. She set the phone down with care and walked to the cabinet, opened it, took down the matching teapot, and set it on the table like a placeholder. Next to it, she laid a post-it note in her own handwriting. "Everything borrowed can be reclaimed." Then she picked up her planner and flipped to Thursday. The notary didn't ask questions. She just stamped, initialed, and passed the pages back across the table like someone sliding chips at a high-stakes game. Miriam signed with a steady hand, the pen gliding over the thick, cream-colored paper, her name in black ink, clean and final. Across from her, Carl reviewed each page before placing them into a flat black folder. "They're officially removed," he said quietly. "You've revoked their access to the property, the accounts, the utilities, even the landscaping contracts. If something happens, it's Ava and Rosie who hold the key." Miriam exhaled through her nose. "Good." Outside the window, a soft rain had begun to fall, turning the street into a watercolor. Charleston never did storms in halves. Even the gentlest drizzle carried a kind of warning. Carl folded his hands. "Would you like a copy sent to Sean?" "No," she said. "Let the silence deliver it." That afternoon, Miriam drove to the family vault, not a crypt, but a small secured archive room tucked into the back of the Charleston Historical Registry building. Her husband had insisted on housing the estate's original documents somewhere neutral. "A house that survives a war should survive its heirs," he once joked. The door opened with an old brass key. Inside, the air was cool, dry, faintly scented with cedar and dust. She ran her fingers along the spines of manila envelopes and leather-bound folders until she found what she needed, a black binder marked Ellis Legacy, Originals. She sat at the lone wooden desk in the center of the room and opened the binder slowly. Property deeds, tax records, blueprints. A letter tucked inside an old envelope caught her eye. It was her husband's handwriting. Miriam unfolded the note, brittle at the edges. "If you're reading this alone, it means you're guarding what we built. Don't let affection blur judgment. Never let love blind legacy. B." Her hands trembled, not with grief, but with understanding. She hadn't needed his permission, but having his voice echo back to her in ink, it felt like a nod from across time. She placed the note carefully back where it had lived for over a decade, closed the binder, and walked out into the rain with her umbrella unopened. That evening, the air in the house felt thinner, like it, too, had signed something. Rosie found her in the kitchen, wiping the countertops not out of necessity, but rhythm. "Do you want me to move the patio chairs back in?" Rosie asked. "It might storm." "Leave them," Miriam said. "Let the wind test what's worth staying." Sean arrived the next morning. No call, no knock, just his familiar, lazy gait across the tile. He leaned against the doorframe of the sunroom, phone in hand, scrolling. "Brittany and I are thinking about putting in a pool. The garden's kind of wasted space anyway, right?" Miriam turned one page of her newspaper, not looking up. "The garden was your father's sanctuary." Sean shrugged. "Right, but that was before." "Before what?" she asked, her tone even. He smiled like a man with an assumption he hadn't tested. "Before it became ours." Miriam folded the paper neatly and stood. "Be sure to let me know when you plan to pour the concrete. I'll send you a photo of the title first." Sean blinked. "What?" She placed the newspaper back on the console table and smiled. "You'll understand soon enough." Upstairs, in her study, Miriam opened her planner again, flipped past Thursday. She drew a line through Sunday's blank square. Then, in careful script beneath it, she wrote, "They don't know they're trespassing." She closed the book. The rain had stopped, but the shift had already begun. The scent of cinnamon brioche and overconfident entitlement wafted through the front hallway before Miriam even stepped inside. She hadn't been invited. But the event was listed on the neighborhood newsletter Brittany insisted on overtagging each week: Ellis Estate Future Heirs Brunch, an intimate gathering celebrating legacy and vision, hosted by Brittany Ellis RSVP link, custom logo. Even the E in Ellis was styled like a gold monogram. Miriam arrived at precisely 11:17 a.m., late enough to be noticed, early enough to make a point. She wore navy silk, pearls, and a tailored gray coat that hadn't lost its shape since the Clinton administration. Her heels clicked lightly on the tile, announcing her entrance before her voice ever had to. The dining room was filled with oversized floral arrangements and people who said things like generational leverage, without irony. Brittany flitted from group to group like a hostess in training for a reality show, her laughter crisp, hollow, performative. Sean stood at the mimosa bar, one hand gripping the edge like it might help him hold posture. He spotted Miriam, and something in his face flickered. Not guilt, something thinner, anxious ownership. Miriam, Brittany said loudly, sweeping across the room with a surprised gasp that didn't bother hiding its edge. What a surprise. I do live here, Miriam replied with a smile, removing her gloves one finger at a time. For now. A few of the guests chuckled politely, unsure if they were supposed to. Miriam stepped further into the room, scanning the faces. Mostly Brittany's work colleagues, a few distant relatives she hadn't seen since Benjamin's funeral, and 2 board members from the Charleston Women's Historical Trust, both staring at her now with raised brows. A waiter passed with flutes of champagne. Miriam took one. Brittany's voice rose again. "Everyone, if I could have your attention. Just a quick word?" She tapped her fork gently against her glass. "We're just so thrilled to be entering this next phase with the Ellis property, honoring the past while building the future. As many of you know, Sean and I have been exploring some restoration projects to really modernize things, without losing the heart of the home, of course." There was scattered applause. One woman actually wooed. Brittany lifted her glass. "To legacy." Before the glasses could meet in a toast, Miriam stepped forward. "To those who build," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the soft jazz playing behind them. "Not those who inherit." There was a pause, just long enough for every head to turn. The waiter froze mid-pour. Brittany's smile stiffened. Sean looked down at his shoes. The trust board members exchanged glances. One of them murmured, "Well then." Miriam raised her glass to her own lips but didn't drink. She simply held the toast in place, then lowered it slowly and set the glass back on the tray of the nearest waiter, untouched. She turned and walked toward the back hallway without another word. Brittany followed her, heels clicking too fast on the hardwood. She caught up in the gallery hall, her voice sharp and low now. "What the hell was that?" "A reminder," Miriam said, smoothing her coat. "You're not the legacy," Brittany hissed. "The house is." Miriam turned, full and unhurried, her eyes calm and precise. "That's exactly why you'll be leaving both." Brittany blinked, faltering. Miriam leaned in just enough to be heard by no one else. "You should have stayed out of the sunroom and off Instagram." Then she walked away. Back in the dining room, the guests resumed their brunch slowly, like a performance restarting after an unscheduled intermission. Sean was still standing near the drinks, shoulders drawn tight, face pale. On the server's tray, Miriam's untouched champagne glass wobbled slightly, then stilled. Upstairs, in her study, Miriam opened her planner once more. This time, she didn't write in it. She slipped a folded card inside, the kind the bank used to print when it confirmed an account closure. It bore the Ellis family trust name. The balance line read $0, 0 cents. And beneath it, she'd scrawled just 2 words in ink. "Next week." The last signature dried before the ink finished sinking into the paper. Miriam sat motionless, her fountain pen resting beside the folder as if it, too, understood the weight of what had just been done. Carl glanced at the clock. "It's official. The Ellis estate is now fully owned by the Harper Women's Restoration Foundation." Miriam didn't look up. "Named after my grandmother, the first woman in our family to own land and defend it." Carl closed the folder and sealed it with a dark red wax emblem that mirrored the foundation's insignia. "They'll receive the certified letter by noon tomorrow. Courier is confirmed." Miriam stood slowly, one hand brushing the hem of her coat back into place. "No press?" "Not yet." "Understood," Carl said, slipping the documents into a locked case. "But if they scream, it won't be because they weren't warned. It'll be because they assumed." Miriam's smile was faint. "And I let them." The courier arrived precisely at 11:52 a.m. Brittany was in the living room, filming a brand partnership reel for skin serum. Sean was in the kitchen with earbuds in, blending something green he didn't intend to drink. The doorbell made Brittany scowl. "Pause it," she snapped to no one, then stalked to the foyer. She signed without reading the envelope, slid her nail beneath the flap, pulled the trifold letter out one-handed, and stopped breathing by the second sentence. "What the hell is this?" she barked, eyes darting across the legal text. "Sean!" Sean looked up, startled. "What?" She threw the letter at him. "It says the house, this house, is now owned by some women's trust, that we're no longer residents. That we have 30 days to vacate the private quarters. Sean read the letter 3 times. Then a fourth, slower. She didn't. No, she couldn't. Brittany's voice hit a new octave. She gave the whole estate to a foundation, Sean. She donated it away. That room you said would be the nursery? It's now part of a grant-funded archival space. Sean reached for his phone with shaking hands. Dialed Carl. Carl answered after the first ring. Mr. Ellis. What is this? Sean said. This is a joke, right? Carl's voice was dry as parchment. Number, she's never been more serious in her life. But this is our... Sean started, but Carl cut him off. The Harper Women's Restoration Foundation is federally recognized and independently operated. The deed is sealed. The house is protected. You may stay through the transition period out of courtesy. But as of this morning, the home is no longer yours to assume. There was silence. Then a crash. Brittany's champagne flute hit the fireplace and shattered. Outside, under the filtered light of late spring, Miriam walked into the garden. Her steps were measured, deliberate, her tea balanced perfectly on the porcelain saucer Rosie had polished just that morning. The air smelled of rosemary and jasmine. The hydrangeas, her grandmother's favorite, were just starting to bloom. Rosie followed a few steps behind, quiet but grounded, holding a second cup in case Miriam wanted company. Did they get it? Rosie asked. Miriam looked out at the sculpture in the center of the garden, the one Brittany had once called obstructive. They're reading it now. Rosie handed her the other cup. Strong brew today. Miriam nodded. Good. They'll need it. The birds overhead resumed their chatter as if the house itself was already shrugging off old weight. Miriam lifted her teacup and took a slow, deliberate sip, her first in the garden since the day Brittany had spat in her drink. It tasted clean, final. Rosie bent to pluck a weed near the garden path, then paused. You think they'll go quiet? Miriam exhaled softly. But now they'll go powerlessly. She didn't look at the house behind her. She didn't need to. The walls had new protection. The foundation was anchored not by blood, but by resolve. She sipped again, slower this time, and added one quiet thought. They brought poison to my table. I brought law to theirs. And somewhere inside, Brittany began to scream. The key didn't turn. Brittany jiggled it harder, rattling the doorknob with increasing fury. It's jammed or something! Sean, try yours! Sean stepped up beside her, already red in the face. He pulled his own key from the pocket of his joggers, slid it into the lock, and felt nothing. The deadbolt held firm. Behind them, the movers waited silently by the driveway. 2 vans, 4 uniformed men. Everything boxed and labeled, just as the instructions had said. Sean knocked once, then twice, then banged his palm flat against the oak door. Mom! He shouted. Open up! No response, just the whir of a ceiling fan from inside and the muffled clink of dishes. Brittany whipped out her phone, stormed down the porch steps, and spun to face the camera. This is emotional abuse, she snapped into the lens. Elder exploitation. I've cared for my mother-in-law for years, and now she's kicking us out without warning. This is how families get destroyed. She uploaded the video before Sean could stop her, tagging it with number disinherited and number justice for us. It went live, and within minutes it began to unravel. The comments came hard and fast. Girl, she's not your ATM. You cared for her? You filmed her teacup. I'd leave too if someone spat in my drink. By the time the movers began unloading boxes onto the sidewalk, the TikTok was already being stitched with duets mocking Brittany's crocodile tears. Inside the house, Rosie and Ava stood in the foyer, arms crossed. They'll try the back next, Rosie said, peeking through the side window. Ava nodded, sipping sweet tea. Already bolted, I triple-checked. The front doorknob rattled again. Then, silence. Then, Ava's phone buzzed. A news alert. She held it up so Rosie could read, Charleston Courier, heiress removed from historic Charleston estate. Subhead, nonprofit trust assumes control of Ellis legacy property. Ava chuckled. Nothing like facts with your toast. In the dining room, Miriam sat at the head of the table with 3 members of the Harper Foundation board, passing platters of roasted squash and cornbread like it was any other Thursday evening. One board member leaned in. We expected more pushback. Oh, it's coming. Miriam said, slicing into the roast chicken. "But that's the beauty of paper. It speaks louder than shouting." The woman across from her smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so," Miriam replied. She kept the first land grant in a sewing tin. This just took more signatures. Meanwhile, Brittany had taken to pacing the front yard, one stiletto heel catching in the lawn every few steps. "We'll sue," she fumed. "This is illegal. It has to be." Sean sat on a moving box labeled guest bedroom, shoes, hers, hunched over his phone. "Carl's not answering." Brittany yanked her purse open and pulled out a folded letter, the one they'd received from the foundation. She pointed at it furiously. "We'll call the Charleston Bar, the Historical Commission, the media." Her phone buzzed. An email from Carl. Subject line: "Regarding your threats of legal action." Body: "Dear Mrs. Ellis, we welcome discovery. CB." She blinked. "He's daring us." Sean didn't answer. He just stared at the house, windows lit warm from inside, shadows moving in the kitchen, like it had already become a photograph he couldn't walk into. The porch light flipped on. Not for them, for the catering van arriving with dessert for the board dinner. Back inside, Miriam lifted a single dish. Lemon chess pie, her mother's recipe. She cut into it with a silver server, her expression calm. Rosie entered quietly and leaned close to her ear. "They're on the curb. Movers are almost done." Miriam nodded. "Good." She passed the first slice to the woman seated at her right and whispered, as if sharing a family recipe, "They used to measure my tea. Now I measure their exit." Outside, the last box hit the curb, and the locks changed before sunset. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. Heavy paper courthouse seal pressed clean into the fold. Sean didn't open it right away. He let it sit on the dashboard of his borrowed SUV while Brittany argued with a customer service rep about the price of faux marble contact paper. When he finally slid it open, parked outside a Walgreens, engine running, he read the words twice before they made any sense. Official recall notice line of credit, $110,000. Collateral, Ellis Estate, owner of record, Miriam Harper Ellis, repayment. Due, 30 days from receipt, his vision tunneled. The line of credit was meant for renovations, a home gym that never got built, custom cabinets that only half arrived, and a half-baked landscaping job that stopped when the contractor's check bounced. And now the house wasn't his. Back in the passenger seat, Brittany scrolled her phone like she was skimming for escape routes. "We'll crowdsource it," she muttered. "Followers are already rallying. I posted a thread this morning, screenshots of the lockout, how we were blindsided. I tagged one of the estate gossip TikTokers." Sean was still holding the letter, fingers clenched. "This is under my name." "No," she snapped. "It's under her name. You were just the access point." He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "That means she can report me, sue me, then beg." He drove to the house. He didn't get past the gate. Rosie answered the intercom. "She's unavailable." Sean's voice cracked. "Please, just 5 minutes." Rosie paused. "Stay there." 5 minutes later, the side gate opened, not wide, just enough for him to enter. She didn't greet him, didn't offer a smile, just led him to the sunroom where Miriam sat alone, flipping through the latest issue of Southern Architecture Monthly. She didn't look up. "If you're here to contest it, call Carl." "I'm not," Sean said. His voice had dropped 2 octaves since the lockout. Less bravado, more gravity. "I got the letter. The recall. I don't have that kind of money." She turned one page. "You shouldn't have borrowed it then." "It was for the house," he said. "No," she corrected, finally looking at him. "It was for your version of the house." He took a slow step forward. "Please, Mom, this will ruin me." Miriam tilted her head, not cruel, just clinical. "You found laughter in my humiliation. Now find discipline in your debt." He stood frozen for a moment. "So that's it?" "That's overdue," she replied. Rosie appeared at the doorway holding a photo. She crossed the room, placed it gently on the desk in front of Miriam, then slipped out without a word. It was a picture, grainy and bent at the edges. Young Sean, maybe 5, balanced on Benjamin's shoulders, both of them laughing mid-sunset by the old garden statue. The same one Brittany had once suggested removing. Miriam's hand paused above the frame. Her breath hitched slightly. Her thumb brushed the photo's edge. Sean saw it. "You remember that day?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer. "I was afraid of bees, but Dad told me the garden was full of stories. He said if I listened, the roses would talk back." Miriam looked down at the photo for one long second, then closed the magazine over it. "You were a different boy," she said softly. "And I was a different mother." Sean swallowed. "Then let me be different now." She didn't move. "You had 30 years. He turned, stunned into silence, and left the way he came in, through a gate that closed softly but completely. Later that night, Brittany posted a fundraiser link on her stories with a black and white photo of her looking sorrowful beneath the caption, "Justice for the modern disinherited. We've all been through pain. Let's heal together." The donation total after 24 hours was $38, most of it from bot accounts. Back in the sunroom, Miriam placed the photograph on a low shelf beside the old tea set. She didn't frame it, didn't hide it, just let it rest where memory and consequence could sit together. Then she picked up her phone, opened her calendar, and circled the final date on the debt notice. Beneath it, she wrote in pen, "Grace ends Friday." The email subject line was all lowercase, performative, casual, desperate. "I didn't want to do this, but..." Carl read it once, then again, slower. He didn't sigh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just lifted his glasses, set them carefully on his desk, and opened a new draft. Brittany's message had started with a breathy, faux sincerity. "I've tried to resolve this privately," and spiraled within 2 paragraphs into full threat. Mentions of coercive isolation, emotional elder abuse, and financial retaliation by a controlling matriarch. She'd CC'd a vague influencer agent and added a signature line that linked to a defunct podcast. Carl's response was 4 lines. "Dear Mrs. Ellis, defamation goes both ways. Kindly tread carefully. CB." He didn't hit send right away. He let it sit, cursor blinking like a metronome of restraint. Then, satisfied, he clicked send and turned back to the stack of RSVPs for that evening's event. The Harper Foundation's first garden reception was scheduled for 6 o'clock. Private, invitation only. Miriam's idea, her guest list. A cross-section of Charleston's civic organizers, historic preservation donors, and women who had been quietly passed over too many times, until now. By 4 o'clock, Rosie had set the tea urns to simmer. Ava was arranging platters of lemon tartlets with surgical precision, and Miriam stood on the veranda adjusting a wide-brimmed hat that had once belonged to her grandmother. "She used to wear this when she met with bankers," Miriam murmured to Rosie. "Never entered a negotiation without her chin tilted just so." Rosie smiled. "It tilts right where it should." At 5:48, the first car pulled up, then another and another. The garden swelled with soft laughter, heels on stone paths, the clink of glass on glass. The breeze rustled the ivy in time with the quartet near the fountain, and at 6:13, the gate buzzed. Ava checked the intercom. Her eyes narrowed. "She's here." "Alone?" Miriam asked, not turning from her post near the gardenia wall. "Wearing white like it's a launch party," Ava muttered. "Says she's media now, wants to document the rebranding of the estate." Miriam lifted her teacup. "Kindly remind her the press release goes out next week, and that the guest list was sealed." Ava disappeared toward the gate. Brittany stood on the sidewalk with a phone gimbal in one hand and sunglasses pushed to the top of her head like a failed crown. "You're making a mistake," she said before Ava could speak. "I usually do," Ava replied, "but not tonight. You can't keep her hidden forever. This story's already growing. People are watching." Ava leaned in just enough to lower her voice. "You'd be surprised how many people like watching you lose." Brittany opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm here as press." "You're here as a regret," Ava said flatly. Then she pressed the button to reseal the gate. Back inside the garden, the guests sipped Prosecco and shared stories about forgotten matriarchs. A woman from the Historical Commission whispered to Miriam, There's something sacred about a woman claiming her name before she's gone. Miriam nodded. Before someone else signs it for her. Rosie appeared at her side, wiping her hands on a linen towel. Back gates locked, fully. Miriam didn't look surprised, just pleased. "Thank you," she said. They watched as a hawk circled overhead, then disappeared behind the chimney line. The air held its breath. The shadows shifted. Ava returned with a satisfied smirk. "You were right. She wouldn't miss a spotlight, even one she doesn't own." "She never owned it," Miriam said. "She just thought no one else wanted the stage." The music shifted, a slow waltz now. Someone laughed softly near the tea service. And across the yard, a girl barely out of college asked Rosie if she could volunteer at the foundation. Ava leaned close, voice almost reverent. "That's the kind of rest you were asking for, I bet." Miriam exhaled slowly. "It's the kind that lasts." But across town, Brittany sat in a dark car with her phone dimmed, the screen filled with DMs she wasn't answering and comments she couldn't delete fast enough. Then a new email landed. From Carl Bixby. Subject: Cease and desist, draft attached. Her fingers hovered above the screen. For once she didn't press post. The envelope arrived 3 days after the garden party, slid beneath the front gate like it hadn't been invited. Because it hadn't. Miriam found it early, tucked between the daily paper and a flyer about home siding. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single handwritten page, Sean's voice unmistakable in every careful stroke. "Mom, I know I've disappointed you, maybe more than once, but I need you to believe that I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stop her. I didn't want to choose, but you did. And I think I finally understand why. If there's anything left to give me, let it be this. The knowledge that I mattered to you, even now. Even after everything. No demand, no signature, just an empty line and a slant at the bottom, like he ran out of courage halfway through." Miriam folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her planner between 2 blank pages. She didn't write back. She didn't tear it up either. That afternoon, she slipped on her navy coat. The one Benjamin always said made her look like someone who knew what decisions were for. The cemetery sat quiet on the edge of town, buffered by dogwoods and iron fences that had outlasted most of the families buried inside. Miriam walked the gravel path slowly, carrying a single folder tucked under her arm. His headstone stood simple, elegant. Benjamin Ellis, 1945 to 2012 builder. Husband. Quiet storm. She sat on the edge of the bench beside it, not the plastic kind cemeteries install for decoration, but the one she'd commissioned last year, built from the dismantled tea table Brittany once tried to replace. "I did what we talked about," she said softly, unfolding the papers. "I protected it." She read aloud. The final clause of the trust, her voice steady but warm. "All rights, deeds, privileges, and operational authority now rest with the Harper Women's Restoration Foundation in perpetuity, in memory of the women who endured quietly and the ones who will not." A bird fluttered into the nearby tree. The wind shifted, soft and respectful. "I know you worried about sentiment," she whispered, "but you always trusted my timing." Ava's voice interrupted gently from behind. "I brought sandwiches, just in case you were planning to cry and forget lunch." Miriam smiled faintly. "I'm not crying." Ava sat beside her on the bench, unwrapping 2 wax paper parcels. "I didn't say you were. I said you might." They ate in silence, the way old friends do. No urgency, no fill the space chatter. Just the presence of time passing together. At the house, Rosie stood on a ladder by the front gate, hands steady as she drilled the final screws into the new historical plaque. Polished brass, black inlay, bold serif font. Harper House for the women who rebuilt a few joggers, slowed to read it. One took a photo. Inside the parlor, Carl handed Miriam a printout of the finalized cease and desist order. They've been using the Ellis name on sponsored content, donation links, and a blog now titled Heir Interrupted. Miriam raised one brow. "Charming. They'll be served by morning. No more merchandising the family line." She nodded once. "Good." But Carl hesitated. "There's one more thing." He slid over a screenshot. A new social post. Sean again. This time, no hashtags, no spin. You ever feel like the place you're from doesn't remember you? A photo of him as a child in the garden, sunlit and smiling, his father kneeling beside him, hand on his shoulder. Miriam stared at it longer than she meant to. She felt the pull, not of pity, but of memory, the kind that lingers like perfume on old fabric. But she didn't reach for her phone, didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the foyer where the old cedar chest sat, the one her grandmother used to hide the deeds during flood season. She placed Sean's letter inside, not forgiven, not forgotten, just filed. Outside, the new plaque gleamed in the dusk, a name rewritten, a house reclaimed. Inside, Rosie poured tea. Ava added a splash of whiskey to hers and winked. Miriam raised her cup. To legacy, Rosie lifted hers. To clarity, Ava grinned. And to what gets left behind. The cups clinked, and a legal courier pulled out of the driveway, 2 signatures lighter. Carl slid the folder across the table like a final hand in a quiet game. It's complete, he said. 92% of your estate is now locked into charitable and educational holdings. The foundation owns the rest. Miriam didn't reach for the folder right away. She was watching the garden through the window, the rosemary swaying faintly in the breeze near the porch steps, the spot where her mother used to hum while trimming. And the rest? She asked finally. Remaining 8% is liquid, easily absorbed into the foundation budget when the time comes. Their projected inheritance now stands at 0. Miriam blinked slowly. Balance achieved. Carl almost smiled. And not a cent unaccounted for. Upstairs, the house was still. Rosie had just changed the linens in the guest suite. Ava was packing an overnight bag in the spare room, with her usual muttering about hotel robes being too stiff. Neither of them knew yet what Miriam had arranged. Not in full. Carl gathered his notes. The media's already backed off. The influencer blog folded. The podcast sponsor pulled. Miriam stood and smoothed the front of her blouse. Brittany? Carl paused. Filed for divorce, quietly, cited irreconcilable misrepresentation. Miriam didn't react. Damage control. She's trying to salvage the brand. And Sean? Carl's lips pressed together. Living in Mount Pleasant, a friend from college took him in, pull-out sofa, month to month. Fitting, Miriam said softly, for someone who once mocked my throw pillows. Carl gathered the documents. You've left nothing undone. Not quite. She walked him to the door, her steps slow but unyielding. Thank you, Carl, for not flinching. I knew what he married, Carl said, glancing once toward the now quiet gate. But I didn't know what you'd become. I'm glad I lived to see it. After he left, Miriam turned her attention to the porch. The rosemary still leaned in the wind. She stepped outside and knelt carefully, pressing her palms to the damp soil. Her mother had called it a stubborn herb, thrives even when forgotten. Miriam planted the new sprig just to the left of the porch stairs, nestled between a stone rabbit and an iron lantern. Grow where they didn't, she murmured. Back inside, she found Ava in the parlor folding scarves into a weekender bag and complaining about spa cucumber water tasting like green regret. You're not going to fold that, Miriam said, pointing to the scarf Ava had crumpled like paper. I'm not going for style. I'm going for steam rooms and silence, Ava replied, tying a knot anyway. In the kitchen, Rosie set down a basket of folded dish towels. We're really going? You leave tomorrow, Miriam said, holding out 2 small envelope folders, each embossed with the Harper Foundation logo. 3 nights, full massage packages. I arranged it last week. Rosie looked startled. You didn't have to. I did, Miriam interrupted. Because you've been holding the corners of this place steady while the rest of it was shaking loose. Ava raised her glass. To steam and sleep and silence. Rosie reached for hers. And the hell away from social media. They laughed. Not the strained kind that came with polite endurance, but the kind that reached into the belly, full, tired, grateful. Later that night, Miriam stood at the top of the stairs watching the hallway. The house felt balanced again, like a ship that had tilted and finally righted itself. She walked to her study, pulled out her planner, and crossed out the word Ellis printed at the top of one of the old monogrammed note cards. In its place, she wrote, Harper, restoration complete. But downstairs on the porch, the rosemary shifted again, not from wind, but from footsteps. Sean stood outside the gate. He didn't knock. He just looked through the iron bars like a boy who'd forgotten how to ask permission. Miriam didn't move. She simply turned off the light. The morning was gray, but still, like the sky hadn't made up its mind. Miriam sat on the edge of the porch swing, her cardigan buttoned to the top, hands folded loosely in her lap. She'd known last night he would return. Regret always circles back. It just doesn't always knock. This time, he did. Just once. She didn't rise right away. Only after the second knock, softer, steadier, did she pull the door open. Sean stood there in yesterday's clothes and clean shame. No phone, no backpack, no Brittany, just a creased windbreaker and eyes that looked older than a month ago. Miriam didn't smile. She didn't narrow her eyes either. Walk with me, she said simply. They moved in silence down the path that curved around the garden, past the rosemary she'd planted 2 days earlier. Sean didn't speak until they hit the far side of the lawn, where the stone bench sat half in shade. I didn't know she spit in your tea, he said, almost a whisper. You laughed, Miriam said, her pace unbroken. I thought she was being petty. I didn't know. He stopped himself. Number, that's not true. I didn't want to know. They reached the iron arch near the back fence. Miriam brushed a fallen bloom off the bench's edge and kept walking. Sean stayed beside her, the silence loud enough to rattle. I didn't do the things she did, he offered, weaker now. No, Miriam said evenly. You never did. You let someone else spit. And then you laughed. Sean flinched. I was stuck, he said. No, she said again, gently this time. You were still. They passed the bird bath his father had poured himself in '96, cracked now, but upright. Sean's eyes lingered on it. I didn't know it was this final, he said. I thought if I apologized. You did, she interrupted. To Carl, to the press, to the bank. He turned, frustration finally showing. So what do you want? For me to beg? For me to grovel in front of Rosie and Ava and the damn rosemary? Miriam stopped. I want, she said, for you to sit on the bench out front, the one your father built, and stay there as long as it takes for you to figure out why you thought any of this was funny. Sean looked at her like she'd just spoken another language. Not here, she said, already turning. Out there, in the daylight, where your inheritance used to begin. She walked back toward the house, her steps soft on the gravel, spine straight. Sean didn't follow. Not yet. From the kitchen window, Rosie watched her approach. Ava leaned in from the breakfast table, a mug of coffee half raised. Did he grovel? He sat, Miriam said, removing her sweater. That's enough for today. They waited. Not for him, but for what came next. And outside, on the bench near the newly staked foundation sign, Sean sat alone. Not speaking, not scrolling, not going anywhere. The sunroom had once been a shrine to polished perfection, gold-trimmed tea trays, stiff floral drapes, and portraits too formal to remember anything real. Now it smelled of lavender oil and faint pencil shavings. Rosie had opened all the windows that morning. The light was different now, gentler, filtered through linen instead of lace. Miriam stood in the doorway barefoot, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She held a hammer in one hand and a framed photo in the other, the last Ellis portrait to come down. It showed her, Sean, and Benjamin, all dressed like strangers for a Christmas they barely remembered. She took one long look, then turned it face down and set it in the donation bin. Only one photo. Went back up. Her and Benjamin, 26 and sunburned, laughing as they planted the first dogwood in the garden. No posed smiles, just dirt under their fingernails and something real in their eyes. Ava entered with 2 mugs, glancing around the freshly rearranged room. You really did it, she said, handing one over. A soft coup in wicker chairs and neutral paint. Miriam sipped. It needed to breathe. What do we call it now? Ava asked, scanning the small writing desk. The basket of throw blankets, the tray of lined notebooks on the windowsill. Miriam turned to the light. A room, finally. Ava smiled. Where it turned. That name stuck. Within a month, Rosie started holding community circles there. Quiet ones, no fanfare, just women who needed a place to say something out loud and know they wouldn't be erased for it. Teachers, retired nurses, a grandmother who'd been raising her grandson alone since the boy was 2. They brought stories and silence and banana bread. Miriam never led. She listened. That was the point. On the last Tuesday of the month, a local journalist came, sent by the community section of the Post and Courier, curious about the rumors that the Ellis home had gone nonprofit. She arrived in flats and a frayed canvas bag, expecting polite sound bites. She left with a story. The article ran 3 days later. An inheritance reclaimed. One woman's home becomes a place for those left out. Underneath the headline, a photo. The sunroom mid-morning. A circle of chairs, no hierarchy, no head of the table. Just stories in progress. When the reporter asked her for a quote, Miriam had paused only a moment. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what survives cruelty. That made the subhead. By Friday, the Foundation's inbox had 6 new volunteer forms and 2 grant inquiries. Ava joked about franchising. Rosie shrugged and baked muffins. Miriam didn't say much about the article, but she kept a printed copy in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, next to the file labeled Final Deed and the letter from Sean she still hadn't reread. That afternoon, she rearranged the armchairs again, not because they needed it, but because she could. The room had become something new, not a stage, not a museum, a room with breath, a room with memory and mercy braided into the beams. Outside, on the front bench, Sean still sat some mornings. He didn't knock, didn't demand, just remained. Miriam saw him once through the window, then turned back to her notebook. She wasn't writing about him anymore. She was writing about restoration. What happens when a wound doesn't just scar, but grows into something alive? What happens when revenge stops being the point and becomes a passage instead? A knock at the door. Not Sean. A woman in her 40s, uncertain posture, holding a small box of journals. "Is this where the women meet?" she asked. Miriam opened the door wider. It is now. The ballroom at the Charleston Civic Forum wasn't opulent, no chandeliers, no velvet curtains, but the light caught on polished wood floors, and the hush that fell when Miriam stepped up to the podium felt bigger than any decor could have delivered. The audience was a patchwork. Young women with legal pads, older women with steady eyes, daughters beside mothers who hadn't always been listened to, attorneys, teachers, social workers, even a senator's aide in the back row. Some had come for the cause, others out of curiosity. But now every gaze was anchored to the woman in navy silk, her hands resting on the podium like she'd always belonged there. Miriam didn't clear her throat or shuffle papers. She just began. "This talk is called How to Write Yourself Back In." A beat of silence, not confused, attentive. "For most of my life, I thought I was the footnote," she said. The woman behind the man, the mother behind the heir, the hostess behind the legacy. I wore pearls, I served tea, I smiled through decisions that happened around me, until one day someone spat in my cup and expected me to drink it. A soft gasp rippled from the third row, but Miriam didn't pause. They told me, without words, that I was finished, that I had had enough, and for a moment I believed them. Her voice didn't shake. It sharpened. But then I remembered something no one else did. I still held the pen. A stir of recognition swept through the room. The shift women know too well, when quiet stops being consent. I rewrote the story, not to punish, not even to reclaim, but to define, to draw a line that said, "This is mine," not because I inherited it, but because I endured. Applause bubbled at the edges, but she raised one hand gently and they quieted again. I didn't burn anything down. I just stopped setting places for people who brought poison. Now they were still, not frozen, locked in the best way. She looked out over them, saw Rosie and Ava in the front row side by side, hands clasped in the space between them. "So to the women here who have been told they're lucky just to be invited," Miriam said, voice sure now, strong, "don't drink what they poison. Own what they count on." The final word hadn't even landed before the applause began. It started with Ava, full-palmed and unflinching, and rose like thunder, a standing ovation, immediate and sustained. Some cheered, some wiped their cheeks. All of them understood something had landed, not just spoken, but etched. Backstage, Miriam stepped into the green room, unpinning her brooch with steady fingers. Rosie followed behind her, eyes misted. "You were seen," Ava finished, "and so are we." Miriam didn't smile. Not in the empty, gracious way, but something lifted in her posture, a kind of release. An intern appeared at the door, holding out an envelope. "This just came for you." She took it. Inside, a simple folded card. "You probably don't remember me. My name's Lucas. You mentored me through the city writing program when I was 11. You told me I didn't have to wait my turn if I was willing to earn the ink. I've followed the articles, the house, the foundation, the speech. You're what I hope to become." Miriam stared at the card for a long time, longer than she meant to. Ava peeked over her shoulder. "Lucas? Little boy who used to write poetry on printer paper," Miriam murmured. "He still is," Rosie said. Outside the door, someone called for Miriam. A nonprofit wanted to license the keynote as a workshop series. She tucked the card into her bag and rose slowly. "We'll return his ink," she said softly, already walking forward. And in the empty hall beyond, the applause still echoed. It was early. Too early for ceremony, but the brass caught the morning sun anyway. Rosie buffed the edge with one last sweep of cloth and stepped back to admire the installation. The new plaque sat just beneath the wrought iron arch at the estate's entrance. No frills, no scripted curls, just bold serif lettering, grounded and exact, "The Miriam Ellis House a Place," rewritten. The screws were flush. The stone was clean. The gate, for the first time in decades, no longer bore the Ellis family crest. Just a name re-earned. By 10, the guests began arriving. Not society guests, but neighbors. The baker from down the street. 3 former students from the women's writing program. One of them brought a tray of lemon squares wrapped in foil. Volunteers handed out cups of sweet tea, ribbons with the foundation logo, and cards that read, "History is not an heirloom. It's a tool." A local string quartet played softly under the garden arbor. The dogwood tree, now fully bloomed, swayed like it had waited for the right kind of gathering. Ava spotted Miriam near the edge of the lawn, watching. "You going to make a speech?" Miriam shook her head. This one doesn't need words." Across the street, a black SUV idled for a moment too long. Miriam didn't turn her head, but she noticed the envelope left at the donation box before the car pulled away. Later, Rosie retrieved it. No return address, no signature. Inside, a cashier's check for $5,000 made out to the Harper Women's Restoration Foundation. Miriam looked at it once, then handed it back. "Put it toward the literacy grant, books for the library room." "Nothing else?" Rosie asked. He already said what he needed to. That night, an alert popped up on Ava's phone. Breaking. Brittany Ellis Files. Chapter 7. Bankruptcy. All social media accounts deactivated. Last public statement archived. Ava held it up without comment. Miriam didn't ask to read it. "I'm surprised she didn't turn it into content," Rosie muttered. "She did," Ava said. "For herself. Just no audience this time." The 3 of them took their walk just before sunset. The garden path looped in a soft L through the rosemary beds and toward the hydrangeas that had just begun to rebloom. Miriam's cane clicked softly against the stone, but her stride didn't falter. They walked without narration, without reflection, no need to retell what had already been claimed. By the trellis, Ava stopped to pull a vine away from the stone, a gesture so familiar it looked rehearsed. "This," she said finally, "feels like air again." Miriam glanced at her. "No more ghosts?" "Only the useful kind," Rosie said. "The ones that teach." They reached the garden's end, where a small wooden bench faced the new sign. The plaque glinted one last time before dusk fully arrived. No applause, no ribbon cutting, just 3 women standing beneath a name earned twice. Miriam didn't speak. She didn't need to. But inside, in the study lit by lamplight, the old letter from Sean still sat folded, untouched since the last read. And on Miriam's desk, beside a stack of grant applications and 3 inked pens, lay a single card printed with her new title, Founder, Director, Steward. The doorbell rang, and in the foyer, Rosie turned the knob, not braced for a guest, but for a delivery, a box of books, labeled, "To be placed in the room," where it turned. The chairs were already in a circle by the time Miriam came down. Rosie had opened the windows to let in the late spring breeze, and the scent of lemon balm threaded with the faintest trace of Earl Grey. The reflecting room felt weightless, not empty, but balanced. In the center of the credenza, resting on a square of navy velvet, was a new glass case. Inside it sat Miriam's favorite porcelain teacup, white, rimmed in gold, its fine crack still visible like a scar that had healed but never vanished. The hairline fracture ran diagonally, the same one she'd noticed just before Brittany ruined it forever. Now it sat untouched, unused, preserved. A small brass placard beneath the case read, "Some lines are best not crossed." The women entered in small groups, no fanfare, no assigned seats. One held a toddler, another had a cane older than the room itself. They smiled, nodded, found their places like they'd been circling this moment for years without knowing it. Miriam stood at the window for a long beat, watching the light shift on the garden stones. Then she turned, lifted the new pot, handmade ceramic, blue glazed, donated last week by a local artist, and carried it to the center. She poured gently, not rushed, not rehearsed. The sound of tea hitting porcelain was soft and steady. A pour that didn't ask permission. No one waited for a cue. They sipped when they were ready. Rosie stepped in with a tray of lemon squares, the same recipe she'd made during the brunch that never belonged to them. Only this time there was no entitlement in the room. Just appetite. And memory. Ava, perched near the bookshelf with a shawl that had clearly not been ironed, raised her cup first. "Here's to drinking nothing," she said, "and reclaiming everything." A ripple of laughter moved through the circle. Easy, whole. Miriam lifted her own cup, slowly. No shaking, no show. The room quieted again. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. But every woman there felt the shape of the silence. What it had cost, what it had bought. The cup touched her lips, her new one, sturdy and earthen, and she took a sip. The tea was hot and sharp with bergamot, grounded by something herbal beneath. Restorative, real. Outside, the rosemary swayed. Later, after the others had gone, after chairs were pushed in, napkins folded, and Rosie tucked a leftover slice of lemon square into a wax bag for Ava, Miriam walked back into the reflecting room alone. She touched the edge of the case, just briefly. Not to open it, just to acknowledge it. That cup would never serve again, but it would speak. In the silence of the room, with only the creak of floorboards and the sigh of ivy at the window, Miriam turned toward the desk where a notebook sat open to a blank page. She didn't write in it. Not yet. She simply picked up her pen as if to remind the room that she could, and in the glass behind her, the cup sat still. Proof that a thing doesn't have to break loudly to be retired with reverence. A knock sounded once at the side door. Rosie peeked in, holding a box. "More journals," she said, "from the community center. They asked if we needed any more." Miriam smiled. "We do." Rosie set the box down, dusted off her hands, and looked once more at the glass case. "You never threw it away." "No," Miriam said. "It never earned the trash." She turned back toward the door, flicked off the light. "They gave me poison," she said softly. "I gave them silence, and took the table."